still. Okay, so where have we come so far from this class here? How far have we come? We've come a long way, actually. And so what we've been able to do is we have been able to work with putting together a database for 2 tables. And so today what we're going to be doing is working with a table or a database with 3 tables. And this is actually quite important on the grand scheme of things because when you work with a database, you're going to find that chances are it's never going to have just one table. In fact, it's going to have many, many tables in there. And so today's lesson is basically designed to help you to see how to connect all of the tables together in your database. And so to actually connect these tables, we're just going to work with 3, but I'm hoping by now that you'll get the gist of things, and that when we're working with more tables, then it's basically the same thing. And also today's lesson is very similar to, there's a lot of our lab in today's session here. And so by the end of today, if you haven't quite been able to get started with your lab, then don't worry about that, because we're going to be, you'll have the notes from today. And so I think that when you put together your database for your lab, it's actually going to be much more simple. Okay, so let us get started. And I'll go back to my slides here. So can we design and populate a database? Yes, we can. Can we run queries to this? Yes, we can. And so basically, we have been working with this table here, department, similar tables that are very, very similar. And just going through just an overview here. Remember that we have to have the ID here, the department, and the room number. These pieces of information here, those are called our attributes. And the attributes are actually, if you think about it in terms of computer science programming languages, these are like your variables, which are going to be holding on to the actual data, which is dumped into the database. So we discussed last time not null. Now this is very, very important. Don't forget about not null here, because the whole idea about not null is that when you have some kind of piece of information in your database, which is absolutely, oops, that was weird, which is absolutely essential here, something that's very, very important. I don't know why this is going crazy here. But when you have a piece of information in your database which is actually very, very important, so for instance, in this case, the ID is probably the most important piece of information in this whole table, because if you don't have that identification in there, then, can I get this bigger? Maybe I'll just keep the slides like this so that you can see this. I do encourage you at home to have your own slides open so that you can actually kind of move around here. For some reason, I can't quite get everything to fit on one page here and have it look. Well, I guess it's okay. But anyway, yeah. So we have this not null. So the thing is that when you have one piece of information in your table, which is the most essential piece of information, which in this case is the ID, it's essential because we're going to be using the IDs as we've done before, but we're going to be using this ID to connect this table with the other tables. And so as we design the schema for this table, and for every other table here, we have to think about that relationship. The relationship I put together is basically just every table has an ID, and the IDs are numbers, which are the same across, or actually not in this case, they're not numbers, but they're actually initials. But it's a word. And it's the same across all tables. And so we're going to be using that idea to connect those tables. Remember, one of the big things that we talked about was that the relationship is absolutely essential. That's where the talent comes from when you're building your database. Right, so we have this not null here. So that means that if you have an entry into the table here where by some strange happening, the ID is not existent. In other words, it's null. In other words, in computer science, when you're putting in, when there's no value, it's called null. And so typically when you're making these databases, you'll have a machine actually putting the database together, actually dumping the data into the database. And so the machine code would put null in there. And obviously people don't always type in null. They might put a blank in there or something else. And I'll tell you that that would still be accepted if you put a blank in here, because a blank is something. But when you put the word null, which basically means it's the absence of information, then this whole record is going to be rejected. It's going to be just sent away. It's going to say this has nothing to do with, there's no information in this table. It has nothing to do with this table here. We cannot accept this. And so you want to use that not null when you're putting very, very important pieces into your database or your database tables. This next piece here, primary key, I'm establishing this ID as the primary key for this table. And that means that I'm saying that this information must be present, and it cannot be, there's no redundancy here. I cannot have, more than one same ID. Every ID that goes into this table must be unique. That means they must be different. Otherwise, you have one record that's going to be overwriting another, and that can happen. But not anymore, though, because when I have this primary key that says that this ID, whatever you put in there, as long as it's something, not null, then it's going to it will stick around. Let me just move on to. I have to do something here for a second on my Zoom here. I have to pin my video. There we go. Now, the other ones here, varchar. The other thing here, the varchar is it's an SQLite variable you can use, or it's a variable handler, I guess you can call it. It's it basically says I don't know whether ID is a number or it's a word, but I'll take whatever it is. It's a very simple way of kind of putting your database together. I should say that it's not efficient though, and you're actually designing a database which is like huge. You don't want to just use varchar all the time. You want to actually use some of the other identifiers that we'll discuss later on, which are like like if it's a character thing, if it's a string, you want to use characters. If it's an integer, you want to use integers. If it's something else, then you want to use something else. But it's like we'll discuss all those later on. But for now, though, varchar works just fine because the database doesn't have to be efficient. It just has to be a database. Then we have the data that we're actually putting in here. And you'll notice that the data is actually kind of separated by commas. And that's kind of, I mean, we're going to talk about this today. When you get data, you typically find that your data comes in as commas like this. Now, what we had to do in the past to insert this data is we had this insert command, which worked out well when you had small amounts of data. Insert into department values. Now, this department is the name of the table. And the values, this is the, over here, this is a tuple. And your tuple has to have, this is a tuple of strings. I mean, and a tuple is kind of a sentence of variables. And one thing I will say, though, and this is probably one of the biggest problems that I see when people are putting together their databases, is that the order of these tuple pieces is not preserved according to the order of the attributes in the table. So, for instance, here, your ID has to go first, then your department has to go second, and then your room number has to go third. And so that's how you have to order this information here. Because your code is not going to know, they're all strings to the SQL. And so your code is not going to know that this is supposed to be CS and this is supposed to be 104, that the order of the departments and the room number are switched. And so you really have to keep an eye on that. And if it's late and you're building a database and you're putting your code together, please go back and, still if you're tired, please go back and check to make sure that the order is correct, because then when you run your queries may be syntactically correct. You're going to find that the output is still wrong because the columns are mislabeled. Now, going on to the next table here we're going to be working with, this is called the T table, which is basically data that's discussing people, whether or not they're having a cup of like tea or iced tea, and then the sandwich that they're going to be ordering. And so you can see that we have JJ, yes, she's having tea because there's one, and her sandwich is a Reuben. And again, we'd have to create a table where this data is going to be sitting. And so we have the ID, the tea, and the sandwich. Now these are different names. I mean, I copied and pasted the text from here, but I could have used the same names here, the same attributes, but I'm making this more user-friendly on my part so that when I'm actually putting this database together or writing my queries, these attributes are more descriptive. Make sure that you use descriptive attributes here because you'll thank yourself. Sometimes you'll thank yourself later when you're actually running your queries. So we have ID, tea, and sandwich, and that's the order that the data has to go in. Oh, and by the way, I also have not null. That means the ID here is very, very important. If that information is missing, I don't want to see the record. It shouldn't be there. Then I have the primary key, and the primary key is saying that there's no repetition whatsoever in ID. Everything is unique. I cannot put more than one of the same ID into this thing. The other tea and the sandwich attributes, they can be the same, but ID cannot be the same. And it's the same situation with the session table here. So you can see that it's actually the same thing. Except here I have ID, session, and material. I take note of how that data is supposed to fit in here, and this is what the data looks like. Now, it takes a long time actually to put some of this information in here. So we've been using this command here, this insert into table values. Now, we haven't actually seen how long it takes but it does take a long time. And so in this world where we are dealing with big data, if you were to make a database where you had 10,000 records or something, and you used a statement like insert into table values, then even if you automated this whole thing, and you made this as fast as you possibly can, and you have a while statement that keeps on going throughout the duration of your data, and every line is carved off and put into this tuple and then inserted into your database with an insert statement like this, even if that were the case, it's still going to take a long time to put that database together. For some reason, it's the code in the internal workings of SQLite make it kind of an inefficient system here. It has to basically load the table, insert this thing in, and then save it, and then close it. And then it does it again and again and again. And some other things go in there too, but you have to, it's like you're doing all these extra steps here. So a second idea about how you can actually load data, like a lot of data into your database, is to use this import statement here. And we're going to be importing a CSV, which is a comma-separated variable file. It's a text file. And this is where our lab is right now. We are in the specs for your lab. There's code in the lab assignment which discusses using this .import statement here. So let's go through that statement here. We're actually going to be building one of these import statements ourselves. And in fact, you have a completed version in your sandbox, but don't look at it just yet, though. We'll go through this together, and then you can use that for reference later on. But the import statement says to load a file, which is in this path and this file name here. Your path is right here. So basically that means that I'm storing this department.csv file in my data directory. I just do that. You can do this. You can have the files floating freely in your local directory if you want. But I put everything into data because what I tend to do is when the databases that I build tend to have large data files, as you've seen in your Uniprot work. The files are huge. They could be like megabytes or 30 megabytes. In fact, there's another one just the other day. I was building one that was probably like 40 megabytes. I don't really want to have 40 megabytes just like tied up in my system here because it just takes up a lot of space. And so what I tend to do is I put my data, I archive my data into this data directory, and then I compress that directory, and so I can hold on to that. I can hold on to the data, but it's not 40 megabytes sitting there. It's more like 10, and so I can get some of that space back. Anyhow. This is the file name here, and then over here, I have my import statement here, the name of the table. You must make sure that the table is correctly placed here, that the file is being poured into the correct table here. Otherwise, that's an error. And sometimes you don't pick up that error because supposing in your file here, in department CSV, in fact, your department CSV, that file would look just like right here. This would be the contents of the file. And so you have a tuple of length 3 in this file. And in this file down here for my table that's going to go into my T table, there's also 3 things in each tuple. And also in my session table, there's also 3 things that go in there. And so the thing is, though, that there's 3 things. All data tables here have 3 entities in them. And so you'll notice that each of my tables is accepting 3 things. And so the thing is, you have to be sure that you're actually putting the department data into the department's table here. Otherwise, you can make that mistake very, very easily. And I've made that mistake so many times, and I thought to myself, not on my watch will anybody make that same mistake. But please do make sure that the file is going to the right table. I know this is a no-brainer, but go back and check, and you might find that it'll save you some time here. So we're going to spend some time talking about automated data entry here. How do we get a whole bunch of data into our base here? And one thing is that you've probably noticed by now that when you download data, as you did for your lab, the data will come as a spreadsheet. It's going to be a giant spreadsheet here. And you sometimes find, in fact, even worse, sometimes you find a spreadsheet where everything's mixed together. It's very annoying. It's like everything is, like you have like, maybe you want to build, you yourself would like to design a website, or a database, which has 3 tables. But the data that you download comes in one big spreadsheet. And so you have to do some things to kind of move things around and make it work. So we're not going to use this insert into table values code here because that would just take too long. If you're working with like massive amounts of data, it will just take you forever to do this. In fact, one database that had, I think it had something like several million pieces of data in it. It took me about I think it took me about like 24 hours, maybe even 2 days, to compile this database using these insert statements. That was early on, and so then this insert should be a little bit faster. So let's work with some CSV files for just a moment here and kind of get an idea about how we can use them. When you go to your when you get some data here, typically the data will come in a spreadsheet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to save the contents of that spreadsheet as a CSV file. And that is because typically, not only does data come to you in the form of a spreadsheet, but even more annoyingly, it comes to you in the form of an Excel document or something like that, or an OpenOffice document. And so you can't just copy and paste that into your database. And so I'm going to try and show you how I would work with this. So let me just get to my thing here, and I have to open up my OpenOffice, and I'm going to show you how I would do this. Bear with me for just a moment, everybody. Just a moment. I'm going to go to my terminal here. I got to change my bash here. I got to change this so you can see my LibreOffice. I don't know why that's not coming up there. Should do. Hang on a second here. Why is that not working here? So LibreOffice, you should be able to see it. I'm not sure why that's not coming up here. But anyway, though, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to open up my LibreOffice so that you can see what I'm working on. And actually, I'll tell you what I have to do. So I'll do document here. Let me just open this, and then I'll put it on my screen, then you'll be able to see this. But if you go to your sandbox directory right now, you should be able to see you should be able to see it. There's a spreadsheet file in there for you. I'm just going to find my file right now. I know that it looks like I'm staring at you, but it's actually here. It's actually here someplace. The file is called tdata.obs. That is a OpenOffice file. And so now I'm going to go back over here, and I'll bring it up on the screen so that you can see it. And there we go. Can everybody see it now? Okay. The whole thing is blocking up the screen. So this is how you're going to kind of get data here. Now, if you just work with me here, I know this looks like a mess on your screen here, and I do apologize for this. I'm going to shrink this down a bit so you can see what I'm doing. But I'm going to be creating, I have my data sets here. So this is my data. This is like the first piece of data that I want to use. You'll notice that this data is actually the same data that's in our slides here. I put that there so you can see more or less what's supposed to go where. If you go back to the slides, you'll see that, like, I was clicking around here. This is the order here. So for my session table, you'll have this information here. So make sure that you have the right, the data is going to the right place here. Now I'm going to go back to my, I was clicking around. I'm going to go back to here. If I can find it. I have so many things open on my screen, so it's hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, this is a trick you can use here. I'm going to create 3 separate spreadsheets at the very bottom here. If you can see them there, spreadsheet 3, 4, and 5. I go back to these files here. I have my insert commands here. I could use, oh, by the way, in the file that I sent you here, I showed you one way that you could create a whole bunch of insert commands where you are basically creating tuples out of the data here, if you can see what I'm talking about. So the data itself is over here. And so what I'm doing then to kind of shorten things or make things easy is I copy and paste these pieces of data into this thing. I separate these pieces of information here around with quotes and commas. And then I have this code right here. And the idea being is that when I copy and paste this into my editor, then I can actually get a whole series of insert statements. And that's one way of doing it, but that's just a time-consuming way. So going back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some CSV files. And so I just copy this into sheet 3. And this is going to be called the, actually, what data set is that? That's going to be called, I'm looking at this over here. This data is going to be called the, away. So many things to click on. Goodness gracious. Goodness gracious. I really wish, I really miss my 2 screens that I had. Okay, so I think this data set is my departments data set here. And so if I go back here, I'm going to call this data set here department. Then I'm going to go back to this over here, make CSV. I've copied and pasted that. The next one here is my T table. I recognize that one here. I copy that. I go to sheet 4. I'll call this T. I'm going to paste that in there, just as you see. Don't worry about the headers. If you see headers, you can get rid of those, because remember that in your own code here, when you design your tables, you're actually creating your own headers, and those headers are your attributes. Go back over here, and the last piece of data that I get from this website is going to be my session data. And so I'm going to go back to my sheet 5, and I type in, session. You can see that what I've actually done is I've created these tabs down here where I'm just creating these. And these are the names of my tables here. That helps me to remember what I'm supposed to do with that data. Now, the big trick, though, is this. I'm going to save your work, because I'm tight. Go to your save a copy. You can't see that from this. Oh, you know, you can't see that. If you go to your save as, I'll just have to walk you through this. You can't see what I see on the screen here. But if you go to your save as under LibreOffice here, or even in Excel, I think you can do this in Excel too, I'm sure you can. But you go to save as, then there's an option that you'll see, and that's called the type you can save as a CSV file. Okay, so CSV file. And you do that for each of these tables here. Now, I wish you could see what I see, but you just can't see that. But what you're going to see, though, is you're going to see a message that comes up on your screen, and it says something like, I can only save the current file here. I can only use the open file here, and that's fine. And you expect that to happen here. And so that means that you're basically saying it's when you save a CSV file, you're not saving as an Excel document or an open office calc document here. Instead, what you're doing is you're saving only the active sheet that you see as a text file. So you want to go through. I guess I wish you could see those, but you just can't see. Oh, what's happened? I think that just crashed. There we go. That's back. But what I'm saying, though, is that when you're saving, you have to save each file as a text file, and it's not going to save the rest of the sheet. It's just going to save the current sheet that you see there. Now, if I go to, I've just done everything. I think I've done everything here. If I go to my prompt here, let's see if I can get to show you where I am here. Hang on a second here. Goodness gracious. Another bash here. Window capture. I'll let you work on that for a second here. Let me just get this thing set up so you can see what I've put together. And maybe you can see that. Okay. Gotta minimize this a bit so you can see that. Oops, you can't see that from your screen. What I'm working with, this has nothing to do with the class here, but what I'm working with here is an editing software, which I have to design basically each desktop that you see before I can send it through to you. And so that's why it just takes me some time to get everything out of the way here. So I do apologize. I'm still new to this, but hopefully this will work. Okay. Now, so where am I then? So I'm going to go through to my sandbox. Actually, where is this here? Okay, so I'm going to go to my sandbox here. This is where I'm working. And by the way, please do not change these files in your, well, if you do change them, you may have some trouble pulling over the new class docs repository. How I usually fix that is I make a copy of the old class docs repository, and then I clone the new class docs repository. So don't remove the old one here because you have your things are there. But if you have trouble pulling over the new thing, then you know why that might be. I'm going to go back now to my, I'm just finished doing the rest of my things here. I'm tired. Let me just finish doing the rest of my things here. So I have this one over here, so I have department. I'm going to do T, and T is going to be, I'm going to save as, and hopefully this won't crash because I'm running out of memory on my machine here. Actually, let me save as, I will save the copy. I don't know what, it's not doing very well. It's not doing very well. Anyway, I'll let you see that for a second. Let me just go and get this done quickly. That's oh, I see. Okay. I'm just making my my data directory. I'll show you exactly everything I've done in just a moment here. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix something here. Okay, so now if I go back to where I was working, hopefully it'll be here. Actually, I made them in a funny place here. I made everything in my temp directory here, just so it was easier to save everything here. But hopefully you can see everything here. But when I go into my data directory, though, I have these three files here: department, session, and T. Now, if I type in, if I want to look at the contents of these files here, I have department. I'm doing concatenation here. That's what cat means. Session and T. And you'll notice that each of these files just has the data. There's no heading information whatsoever. You'll also notice that I put the data into this repository here called data. Now, I have an old build file, which you also have here, which I'm giving you, but I'm going to I'll just take you through what the build file is supposed to do. Let's go back to the slides for a second here, and I'll show you some of the details in that build file, but it's all there, so maybe we can save ourselves some hassle and having to type everything out again. So in your, once you have saved your files as CSV files here, your files are going to look like this. One thing I've noticed is that you may have to load each file with an editor, like your Atom editor, and to remove spaces, because sometimes you have spaces that appear. And spaces are annoying when you're working with data, because spaces make one field actually slightly different from what you expect it to be, even though you can't see what that difference is. In other words, a space creates a different piece of information here. So that's why I have this note right here saying, please use an editor like Atom to remove the spaces. And I think that when you finish, your data is like this. But I'm not going to worry about moving my data just right now. It can be done, but just keep that in mind, though. Now, this is the code that we have seen before. In fact, this is the code that, for instance, is in your lab. We have this this line right here that says, by the way, when you have this slash star slash, that's just like a comment in Java. That means you can actually add comments to your build file. I call these build files here. That's because we use them to build our databases. But you can add these slashes in these build files for SQL, so that this is a comment, and it really helps you later on when you're trying to put together your data or your database. We've seen this line before, .separator, and what this is saying now is in lab the files came through as tabs, so we had this /t, but we no longer have a /t simply because our data is coming through like this, where you have commas. Each piece of information is separated by a comma. And so you have to tell SQLite that the data is coming in with commas, and that's how it's going to parse the data. That means it's going to take out each piece and build its own tuples in memory and then insert them into the database. Then we have this code down here, and we've seen that before. That's also in the lab, where we have .import. Then you have the path, then you have the file name, and then you have the table that it's going into. Now, one thing I haven't shown you in this thing here is that above all this code, you have to have your table creation code. In other words, above here, I'm just going to go back here to where our tables are, I have to have code that looks like this. So that means if I'm working with 3 tables, I have to establish those tables first. So at the top of my file, And I'll show you the file in a moment here. But at the top of my file, I have to have my table creation code. And then, and only then, can I actually use this down here, because once I've developed or created my table, then the table exists in memory, and then I can pour information into it. And so one of the big problems that I typically have is that I'll have all these import statements here when I'm building a big database, but I would have neglected to add the actual table creation code for, say, that table there. And so when the database gets down to building this particular table, it says, I have this data file, I found that, and that's okay, but I have nowhere where I can put the data in place. So then we have this cat statement right down here, and basically what this thing does is it reads our database, our data files here, and then it puts those files into this. It pipes them along here. So let's go through this here. You read the builder file. It takes the contents of that builder file here, and it pipes it into SQLite 3. That's what this means here. This right here, you can think of that pipe. It's just the same command that's above your enter key. You can think of that as, in English, as and then. So first of all, concatenate the text file, and then send the contents of that file to SQLite 3, which will then create this file, mydb.sqlite3, and everything should be sent over accordingly. Everything should be fine. So that's where this is all about here. I hope that this is meaningful. So now let's just go ahead and try that. So I'm going to go back to let's use the build file. I'll just take you to the build file, and I'll just show you what that's. Oops, I need to close that down like that. Let's go back to the build file and just see kind of like how that build file works. And so I'm going to use Vim here to look at the build file, which is here. And you'll see that, I can shrink this down a bit. Oops. Okay. So here we have the 3 different table creation commands here, which are exactly as they are out of the notes. And then you have, for instance, the import statement here, where you have import data department here. And then you have the import t here. Basically, you're taking this file t and putting this into t. And then you have the session data set, and you're putting that into the sessions here. And I always have in the data files that I give you these build files a sample query, so that it helps to guide you to get through this. And so it helps you to figure out kind of like how you can use this equation here. So we have cat, and we have this the same command here. So I'm going to just go ahead and use this here. I'll copy this. I'm going to exit this out of it like that. Oops. And I'm going to make sure that the data is actually sitting in the data directory here. And if I run this command here, hope we can see that. Maybe I can make this a bit longer so you can see what's going on there. There we go. Run that through. Now you're going to see that you have these error messages up here. That's okay. Don't worry about don't worry about those messages here. What that's saying is that, remember on lines 3, 12, and 18? On 3, 12, and 18, line 3 is this drop command. Hope you can see that there. Line 18 is another drop command. And line, oops, excuse me, and line 12 is another drop command here. So what that's saying is that if your database already exists, if you've built this database and it's already there, then you drop those tables and then you can repopulate them. That's the only way you can do that. And so otherwise, if the database is not there, then there's no table to drop, so therefore it's an error message. But otherwise, if the database is already there, then the tables are dropped and there's no error message. So if I run this again, for instance, you'll notice that there's no error message this time. But if I remove my mydb file here, which is gone now, and then I run this cat again, you'll see that those error messages are back again. So don't worry about the error messages here. It just means that there's no table to drop. We're trying to drop something that isn't droppable. Okay. Okay, so anyway, so our database is basically built. That's this file right down here. Now, to get into that database, we have to type in SQLite 3. We go into mydb, press enter there, and we're in our database. And so we're probably wondering now, how can we tell whether this database is actually working? Well, we can run some queries. Oops, hopefully I can get this bigger here so you can see what's going on. Okay. So if I type in tables, I have department session T, and I can type in select all from T, and see that something's in T. I can do select all from session to see that something's in session. And I can do something, I can do select star from department to see that something is there. And so the import statements works. And so this is how you'd basically import a bunch of data, like quickly. And you can see that it's relatively simple here, it's automated. And you can see that if something happens where, let's just say I drop one of my tables by mistake. Let's just say, well, let's get out of here. I'll just show you the command here. So the command to actually drop the tables, if you forget, will be right here. I'm just going to go ahead and drop my department table here. Let's go back into here, and here I have tables, and I'm working with this thing, and something happens. I type in this command by mistake. If I type in tables, I think, oh my gosh, session and T exists, but my department table is missing. What have I done? Oh no. So what you can do now is you can just exit this whole thing here, and your file, you just rebuild it. No big deal there. And so you can just rebuild this with your same old command where you're concatenating this build file. You pipe everything into SQLite 3, and then you build the same file again. And then when you go back into your file, type in tables, it's back again. And so this is how you can build your database. And so if anything happens, and I expect you to really kind of torture your databases here and see what you can do. But if anything happens to this database where it somehow breaks or it's done something to it, it falls apart, you've erased data. I mean, provided that the data is just like, from a file like this, it's not critical data. I mean, you should obviously be backing up your work all the time. But provided that nothing it's just a demo database here, then you should be good to go. Just rerun your build file. And so it's for this reason that we're going through and copying all this stuff into a text monitor or in a text editor here. So let's go back to one of the commands here. So I'll just go back to I'll leave here again. Let me show you again the build that we have down here. And you'll see that there's this command down here. By the way, are there any questions and anyone online here? Are there any questions in over what we've just covered so far? If you have any questions, let me just go ahead and stop me here. Okay. All right. So I'm trying to get back to my slides here. And there's all these things I have to click on here, which is just, goodness gracious. I'll go with my chat again. I'll just close that by mistake. Open this. Now let's go back to the slides. And the slides, we're going to be connecting these three different tables here. Now that we've actually inserted data into three different tables here, let's have some fun with this thing here. And so this is actually what the tables look like here. In fact, this is what your schema is going to look like, where you can actually this is your schema, where you can see like the name of the table, and you can see like the attributes, and you can see what types of attributes they are, what data type they are. That's your schema. But this is your schema with data. You typically don't show your schema with data here because the data itself is generally not very necessary to show. It's in the database, it's assumed that it's there, and everything's okay. So typically when you're talking about your database, you would use this this kind of system here, where you're just basically drawing out the tables and you show the attributes that are inside those tables. So when you're querying two tables, remember we did this. We queried two tables, and we had to have this piece of code right here. This was absolutely fundamental to our table here. Absolutely fundamental. And what we were doing here is basically we're saying that we have the department room number we're pulling information from. We're pulling information from the team or the T sandwich, and we're looking for department and T. And what we wanted to find out, for instance, we wanted to find out where we wanted information from both tables here. And so both tables have to be somehow connected. And so this piece of information over here was how we connected the tables. Now we know that the ID behind the department and the T, is the same here. ID JJ OBC AMGK, JJ OBC AMGK. That's this information right here. The ID they're all the same in all these tables here. And so that's how we're connecting our information together. Now, we're going to take that a little bit further here, where we're going to have, for instance, this is our two table here. we're able to do these things here. But now we're going to take this a little further here, where when you have 3 tables, you have to have another conditional, basically under your where you're connecting the T table with the session table. Then you have to connect the T table with the department table. And then you have to connect the session table with the department table, which is right here. And so that is how you make this connection where all these tables are now able to share information. And so that's the reason why it's so necessary when you're designing your schema to design tables here where they're all connected in the database here. That means there's some link connecting one table to another. Any link is fine as long as it's there. That means you can get to that table using code. Right. So this is the actual information here that it's going to be connecting everything together. So as you're building your, well, actually I should say something here. As your tables or as your databases become more and more complicated, you can see that your where statement is going to become more complicated too, where you have more and more information about the ID, you're connecting the IDs of the tables together. You're connecting the primary keys of tables. And by the way, these are primary keys here, and so I know by the design of my website that this information is absolutely unique, nothing different. Or all the things all the references are unique. That means there's no repetition whatsoever. So let's just go ahead and run some simple commands here and just kind of get a feel for how this thing is supposed to look. And so we have, let's see here. Let me just go ahead and do something. Make sure that this, I have to make more, change something here. Left-handed here, so I can't put nothing here. Let's look at if any other data there, any other notes I'm supposed to mention here before we finish this whole thing here. But let's just go ahead and run one of these things here. So the command that I've actually given you here basically can be reapplied to seemingly any of these things here. So let's just do the first one here. It says show the ID, the sandwich type, the session material, and the department room number across all these. There's no conditionals. There's like no special conditionals here. But we want to see like what we want to basically find out what the ID is, the sandwich type, the session material, and the department. Now, we know that information is going to be coming from 3 different tables here, and so we have to connect those tables accordingly. So this is the code that we're going to be using, and I think that this is actually going to be the code that we would use. So let's just go through and see how to think this thing through. So if I can go back to my editor here, you can see this. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to go inside my SQLite 3. I'm going to load my MyDB here. I'll make sure that my tables are all present, which they are. They're right there. I'm going to go. I have to go select. In fact, what are we doing here? We're looking to see whether the sandwich type, the ID is sandwich type. And so I know that each of these departments has the ID here. In fact, one thing you might want to try doing first of all is type in schema. And then you type in your select statement here. I know that my T table has my ID in there. They're all the same IDs, and so it doesn't really matter where that ID comes from. It could come from any table here. So I'm going to say that T table is the one that's going to be providing me with my ID. Next, I'm looking for the sandwich type here. Well, where does sandwich come from? Sandwich would then come from the T table too. So I'm going to put T.sandwich. And I'm going to edit some things around here. I'll put this from over here. And I know that my table that information is supposed to come from is the T table here. Now I know that there's going to be other tables added, so I'll come back to that. Now next, what else am I looking for? I'm looking for the session material. That means what's going on in the session. So going up to my session table, I see that session is basically session. So I can type in, for instance, session. Actually, just to be formal here, I'm going to capitalize the T. Finally, I have department room here. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to type in departments, and I have room number. One thing I haven't done is I haven't updated my table here. Oops. A T. And the next one I put in there is session. Department. Now, if I just push enter, then I get all this stuff here. Now, just because I've just because I've typed in this quote or this command here and I get some results doesn't mean that these results are correct. That's one thing that we always have to keep an eye on. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to type this. We have the from statement. Now we have the from the where statement here, where we're going to be connecting our t ID is equal to the session ID, and then we have t, or choose any table here, I guess, that you've already mentioned up front. TID, in fact, maybe I should make this also uppercase. TID is equal to department. And then I have, for instance, my last table is going to be my session, I guess. Let's see, so I have T is equal to session, T is equal to department, so I have now session ID is equal to my department ID. Whoops, what's happened here? I just made a mistake someplace. Oh, there's 3 of these. There we go. So my command is this, and so what I've done is I've linked together all the tables here. And so what I'm saying is that across the board in this database, I want to make sure that all the IDs line up, that they are all the same across all tables here. And that's how you're stringing together your information, making sure that everything is good to go. And so that's really all that there is to it. And so if you have a bigger database here, or bigger, with more and more trees and things, then it's really the same idea that you're just kind of putting together all this. You're just putting together these you're stringing things together. So for every table that I want to invite into my, to show information here, like up here, for instance, every table that I use, I need to somehow tell the query how those tables are connected with the rest of the stuff. Are there any questions over this whole thing? It's basically all this. But the only thing that's really annoying about working with this is that in all this code down here, you get I mean, there's so many opportunities to make mistakes here. But I think, though, that going back to how the slides work here, if you keep in contact, if you kind of keep your slides, if you first of all design your queries in a system that looks like this, in this kind of form here, where you know that you have a select statement, you know you have a from, you know that you have a where, and an and here, in these connections here. If you know that you have this form, then it should be okay to keep everything together. I think that we're out of time, actually. I didn't mean to keep you guys an extra 2 minutes here. But basically, that's all that there is here. And so now you have the capability of building an extensive database. Well, first of all, putting extensive big data into that database with basically an arbitrary number of tables. And you should be able to put the whole thing together in seemingly no time at all.